Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
And welcome back, everyone, to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. On today's episode, we're bringing you a full-length chat about all things e-tagging salmon and steelhead. Digital content specialist Ben Beery and I sit down with our anadromous fisheries coordinator Chris Sullivan and Tara Reichert, Fish and Game's license operations manager, to talk about how the first year rollout has been going, how fisheries managers are now able to make more accurate decisions in real time when managing salmon and steelhead, and whether or not the e-tagging platform may be tested out with other species in the future. As always, let us know what you think of the episode and what else you want to learn about in future episodes. We've heard from a few of you that you enjoy these occasional full-length discussions and would also like to see them videotaped on YouTube. Not sure why anyone would want to see my ugly mug talking about fish and wildlife, but we are considering filming a few of these sit-down style episodes in the future. So thanks for your feedback. All right, let's get to it.
Went like that. So
That's hilarious.
I don't know.
If I ever
Exactly.
get an offer for a free chihuahua, I know who I'm calling.
No, I'm over. Like I don't want. I'm to the point where I don't want pets anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't. Like kids or teenagers,
They're kind of like pets.
pets enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you.
That's not what this podcast is about.
It should be about.
No.
Take us away, Ben.
All right, here we go. Another episode of the Hook and Bulletin brought to you by Idaho Fish and Game. Today, we are talking about e-tagging of salmon and steelhead. And for some of you, you may be like, what? We have e-tagging? Tell me more. Or some of you may be like, we have e-tagging. That's ridiculous. We're going to vet that. We're going to flesh that out. We're going to learn all about it today. So I have Connor J. Lease here with me. I also have Tara Reichert here. And we also have Chris Sullivan. And I'll let Tara start with just tell us a quick bio of who you are, what you do, and your involvement with e-tagging.
Cool, yeah. Thanks, guys, for having us today. Excited to talk about this stuff. I'm Tara Reichert, the license manager here at Fish and Game, so I work in our administration bureau and basically oversee all things that happen related to licensing from the customer service perspective to the actual electronic licensing system. Been here almost 4 years, was doing this in Florida before that, so...
And you escaped.
I did.
Yeah.
It was a good move for me, I think, so, yeah.
Yes. And Chris?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Sullivan. I'm the Salmon and Steelhead Harvest Coordinator. I work out of the Boise headquarters office, and I've been with the department since 2005. I work more on the fishery implementation side of things for our salmon and steelhead fisheries throughout the state, and certainly utilize the data that comes out of this e-tagging program for our fisheries management purposes. And also like to add, I'm an avid salmon and steelhead angler and have personally tagged some fish with the e-tagging application.
Fantastic. So you are in radio world, we would say a P1. You are the person we're talking to anyways, that we would be introducing e-tagging to. And we would be asking you to use this as well. So it's wonderful that, like, you're all of it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You fit the demographic. Did you escape from anywhere?
Minnesota originally.
Oh.
Born, raised, grew up there, and came out here shortly after college.
Sweet. Very good. All right, e-tagging. So, e-tagging, I guess we started this, Idaho Fish and Game started this process of rolling out this service to our constituents about this time last year. We did some committee work that involved Fisheries Bureau, Communications Bureau, licensing, enforcement. All those people came into the room and we started talking about what is this will it work? Will our constituents like it? Tara, a little bit, what did that process look like? And what really prompted us as an agency to say, hey, we should really look into this?
Yeah, so probably one of the biggest driving factors is just that a lot of our sister states, neighboring states, have already done this. We're a little behind the 8 ball on this, I'd say. E-tagging is used for salmon, steelhead, big game, birds, you name it, in states all across the country, and it was time for Idaho to catch up a little bit. Choosing salmon steelhead, I think, was a really good strategic option for us. It was used sort of like a pilot, I guess. It was a relatively small group of folks that we knew we could softly roll something out to that would give us good feedback. We talk to these folks pretty regularly. We know who they are. They're good boots on the ground for us to kind of test something like this, right? So one of the bigger driving factors was simply to get with the program. But more on the fishery side, and we can let Chris kind of talk about this, was the need for some better real-time data management. And I'll kind of punt it over to you for the rest of that.
Yeah, certainly, aside from what Tara said from the convenience and kind of moving our tagging and permit validation process into the current century, it certainly offers us some new ways to look at data and new ways to obtain harvest-related information for salmon and steelhead that helps us dramatically as managers. And I don't know if we want to get into that stuff now or wait till later on in the program, but
yeah, I guess how does fisheries take the data that well, number one, prior to e-tagging, how was fisheries collecting the data that you guys use? What does that look like to the layperson if somebody approached them after they caught a steelhead or something? If we had a conservation officer approach them and just want to chat, like, what's the purpose of that?
yeah, so our prior setup prior to e-tagging for salmon and steelhead involved a large number of technicians and biologists out on the landscape interviewing anglers. And in combination with interviewing anglers, they were getting angler counts, whether that be at boat ramps or people along the bank. And those pieces of information, the folks that actually got interviewed, we derived catch rates from that information. And that was applied to the total number of anglers that were out on the landscape to generate a harvest estimate. And that was generally done over a weekly time period. As you can imagine, with a state as diverse as Idaho and multiple salmon and steelhead fisheries occurring on the landscape at any given point in time, we had a lot of staff time dedicated to collecting this information out on the ground. So as we move into electronic salmon and steelhead permits and utilizing that data, it's going to drastically cut down on the amount of field work that our staff has to do. And actually, we're going to be getting better harvest estimates from this technology than we do with our boots on the ground approach. So we see a lot of advantages coming our way in terms of fishery management. Another big one that is going to be helpful for us is getting more real-time information from our harvest estimators. Our current approach involves basically making weekly estimates of harvest for Chinook, and we actually, for steelhead, generally make a season-wide estimate after the season's over for what that harvest is. So in both of those instances, being able to look at these permit harvested fish through these electronic permits in real time will improve our ability to make up-to-date harvest estimates. And as folks know who fish for salmon, especially where seasons can turn off and turn on in very short time intervals, this will definitely help us to both avoid overestimation of harvest as well as underestimation of harvest. So it should make things a little bit more clear for us as fish managers as well as for folks out on the ground fishing.
Does the app have a running tally of how many fish have been tagged if from an angler's perspective? So if you open up the app, does it show how many fish have been actively tagged up until that point?
Yes. At the angler level, it does. You can't see on a statewide basis how many fish have been tagged, but for each individual angler, there is a tagging history on their smartphone app that shows by species and river location code and date all the fish that individual angler has tagged in a season.
That's cool.
Otherwise, we have that data on our website weekly. That's reported by all the boots on the ground, and I guess digitally now too. Some numbers are maybe.
Yeah, so we have kind of the total harvest for a given fishery is reported on our website weekly. And that information will continue, but eventually it's going to be fed by these electronic data submissions from the electronic salmon and steelhead permits.
And Chris, this year we really did a hybrid approach, right? So we really kept boots on the ground all year long, and through the end of the year we will. We haven't completely transitioned to using all of this new electronic data. And moving forward, we'll get a little closer to electronic and a more boots on the ground approach, right?
Yep, that's correct. We have not yet made the full transition over to making our harvest estimates from e-tagging. We figured a year plus of having both methods running so that we can compare those estimates and make sure we're not making any assumptions that are invalid about how angler types are using this new technology. That's what we're trying to gain in this first year. And we don't know exactly when we're going to make the full transition yet, but we're eager to do it. And a big part of that is the level or the percentage of anglers on the landscape that are using electronic salmon and steelhead permits needs to kind of hit a minimum threshold before the data quality really gets to where we want it to be. And we're already quickly approaching those thresholds.
Yeah, I guess that's my next question is how has the response been? After rolling this out last April 2024, how's the overall response been?
Yeah, so honestly, a little quiet, which is always good. The only folks we usually hear from in a really quantitative way, you have something really good or really not so good to say, and the fact that we haven't got a whole lot of negative responses is really great. Additionally, our officers in the field have a lot of good things to say. It works easily like we had hoped for. Most anglers have figured it out pretty easily. Again, this isn't a particularly new concept, particularly non-residents that have done this in other states were able to jump into this pretty easily. And we actually see a slightly higher percentage of non-residents opted into this rather than residents. And again, I think it's because they might be a little more used to it and because they may have purchased after our launch date back in April. But overall, I'd say a swimming success, no pun and pun intended.
Yeah, and I think to add to that a little bit, as the word spreads on the river that this technology is out there and folks are using it successfully, I expect our buy-in to continue to ramp up. One common thing that we heard from anglers early on is, the doubt or the disbelief that this technology could be used in areas that don't have cell phone reception. And this app can be used in an offline mode where you can still validate your permit if you're, in the middle of nowhere in Idaho and long ways away from any cell towers. You can still use this app, validate it. It's valid from a legal perspective when you take those steps. And then whenever you get back into service, your app will upload your harvest information to the server, and that record will be counted in our database.
Chris and Tara, can you provide a little context too on like how many states nationwide also have some sort of, from a fisheries perspective, an e-tagging platform, or is that something that you guys don't have an idea of?
Specifically, only fisheries or also inclusive of fisheries? I'm not totally sure. I would say of them, most of them are Western. A lot more Eastern states have moved into the big game territory, and Western states have been a little slower to catch up on the big game side of things, but I don't have a super great number to share other than quite a few.
Yeah, and just for salmon and steelhead specifically, Oregon is the only other state in the Pacific Northwest that has an electronic permit tag system for salmon and steelhead.
And are they full-time? Do they produce paper tags too, or is it all digital?
They're a hybrid, and they plan to be for quite some time. But it is buy it, and that's what you have for the season or year. If you opt in for e-tagging at the beginning of the year, that's what you're with for the rest of the year. Same thing for paper.
So you can't switch back and forth. And I guess we should clarify, in Idaho.
Correct. Both in Idaho and Oregon. The one that you choose at your initial purchase is what you're with for that year.
Okay. And you don't have to go into a store to purchase this. You can be on your couch in your underwear and purchase this tag on our app
Yep, it's the best way to buy.
Yeah.
And even better than being on your couch, if somehow you end up on the banks of a river that has salmon and steelhead in it and you haven't begun fishing yet and realize you don't have your license for the year, if you had cell reception at that location, theoretically you could buy your fishing license and permit at that time and basically start fishing immediately.
I think that's probably the best feature, like in a mode of panic, that you can say, hey, I think I can do this right here, right now, and be fishing 5 minutes later, which is wonderful. Since Tara, run us through the numbers a little bit. Since we started in April, I believe it was April 1st, and Connor and I have put out a video, an April's Fool's Day joke, and we were advised that there was some people across the state that said, don't roll this out on April Fool's Day because people won't actually believe that it's real, which I took to be like, that's a positive thing, that people are ready for it, and it's ripe for people to use, that they'd be so hopeful and then it would be taken away from them. But it was real, and we have it. So what have the numbers been since April 1st of this year as compared to maybe 2023?
So, like we mentioned a little earlier, when you buy your first salmon or steelhead permit of the year, you're stuck with that option, whether you choose e-tagging or paper. So because we went live in April, we did kind of lose a little bit of the population that maybe wanted to jump into e-tagging because they had already purchased a paper permit prior to April. Probably a majority of residents that are pretty avid anglers had purchased a paper permit because there was a really good spring season about to open in April or had just opened. So I think what we're seeing this year is probably not the numbers we're expecting to see in the future, but just off the cuff, since we went live in April, we've got over 10,000 people opted into e-tagging for their salmon or steelhead permit. It's about 34,000 people that are still on the print side of things, so we're about 23% of all of our salmon and steelhead anglers using e-tagging. Yeah, not bad numbers.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
And again, we're skewing a little more, a little higher on the non-resident side of things for many of the reasons we already said. They might just be more familiar with it, or they purchased after April, so had more of an opportunity to select the e-tag option. But all to say, I expect that to look quite a bit different next year. We were pretty soft about the announcement for e-tagging, I think, as well, as much as like we hyped up April 1st. After that, we kind of just let it roll. Yeah. And I think we've got a good opportunity the next month or so as we start gearing up for 2025 license season to remind folks e-tagging is a thing. They can set it for auto renew. You can be good to go with e-tagging, set it and forget it kind of option as we move into 2025.
Yeah, and I certainly spoke with many anglers this year when I was Chinook fishing in the Riggins area who had paper tags, and they, as Tara had mentioned previously, bought their tag earlier in the year, and they were very intrigued by the option to go to an e-tag, and I believe there'll be a pretty big conversion of folks coming up in 2025.
Did you, in your conversations, were they knowledgeable that it existed? Were they hungry for it? Were they open to it? Or I guess I'll let you answer that, and then I've got a demographics question for Tara as well.
Yeah, by and large, people were excited about it. You know, it's if there's one thing you're not going to leave at your house when you head out to go salmon and steelhead fishing, it's probably your cell phone. And there's plenty of people that show up in a place and they don't have their license or their paper tag, and they can't fish legally. And so just that convenience of like, hey, I know I'm not going to leave my phone at home, and if I had all this stuff on there, then it'd be one less thing I had to worry about. So that, along with the fact that you don't need to find a pen from your buddy on the river after you've harvested a fish and write all that information down, it all gets kind of streamlined in the app, and certainly makes it a more efficient and convenient tool for the angler.
Now, what happens, though, if you, in that scenario, you forget to bring your paper tag out fishing and you download it on the spot or whatever? What happens to that paper tag after you have the app?
So right now, if you have not opted into e-tagging and you have your paper tag and you leave your paper tag at home, tough luck, Chuck. That's a bit of a bummer because, like we mentioned, if you opted into paper, you're stuck with paper for this season.
Okay.
So, again, hopefully in 2025, we'll see a lot more folks that have jumped all the way into e-tag because we give them that option to buy early in the year.
Okay, so right now, as it stands, it's still a fifth, or it's still a one or the other option.
Yep.
It's not. And will it ever be crossover? No.
I would guess not. We'd have to have some pretty creative conversations about that. The purpose really is, and good, bad, or indifferent, to make sure no one does anything that they shouldn't. So there's a possibility that you could maybe misunderstand your seasons and bag limits if you had both a paper tag in your pocket and an electronic version as well, and you could maybe notch on both. And then there's some miscommunication on what you should and shouldn't be reporting for harvest and quantities and things like that.
That makes sense.
So as far as the converts that we've had, what is it? The younger folk that are? Can you see that information demographically? Is it a lot of the old dogs that are like, hey, this is actually pretty cool, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I don't have hard numbers in front of me, but anecdotally, I'd say likely a slightly younger demographic is choosing this route. From not an e-tagging perspective, but just an electronic purchasing option versus purchasing in person. That's what we see is folks that have always purchased in person are likely going to keep doing that, and they're usually an older crowd. But that's not to say that there aren't champions that are out there with gray hair telling everyone that it's a good idea to go to e-tagging.
Yeah. And I'm curious too. From you mentioned the out-of-state perspective. Are you seeing, or do you have numbers to back up or show if it's more Western folks that are fishing from out of state using the e-tagging system, or Eastern folks?
We could have that data. Again, I don't have it offhand. But yeah, absolutely. We can kind of capture male, female, age, where you're from, all that good stuff. We can kind of figure out who's e-tagging and who's not.
So we could close a river section to residents from New Jersey. If we had too many residents from New Jersey.
We hit the quota.
Yeah, we've hit the quota of New Jersey residents.
I'll let you make that call.
Yeah,
then.
I'm not going to do that. And I'm sorry to anybody from, it was just I just chose a state.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's people from New Jersey fishing in Idaho.
Well, we'll know. We'll find out.
Yeah, we're going to in the comments section. Chris, how is looking forward? You talked a little bit about data management, and how that's going to help. Like in a dream scenario, what percentage of all of the licenses sold would you like to see that would give you the optimal, and you may not have this offhand, the optimal data? That would be amazing for you, that you could stop sending people out to ask questions on the riverbanks and the boat docks. Like, what is it? 100%? I mean, 100 would be awesome, but it seems fairly unattainable. What does that look like for the Fisheries Bureau?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the obvious easy answer is 100%. If we had everybody out there e-tagging, it would make our lives all a lot easier. But again, out of convenience for anglers, we want to, at least at this point in time, still allow both of those options for folks, even though they have to choose one or the other each year. But given some of the modeling work that has been done, if we ended up above 30% in total use for electronic permits, we would have robust harvest estimates, and we're pretty much there almost already.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah, and Tara can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that during the initial rollout for Oregon's electronic system, they started in the single-digit percentage range and have worked their way up close to 50%. So,
well, we're going to hear about that in the comments too. Now we're bragging.
So yeah, again, I would expect us to get north of that 30% and close to that 50% number here over the next couple of years as familiarity for this grows.
So when we and I will divulge, I was on part of the committee that started as the communications representative. One of the first questions that everybody brought up was like, well, what if you drop your phone in the river? What happens?
Has that happened yet, as far as you know? Did it happen to you yet, Chris?
No, but I will admit some general uncomfortableness as I was standing knee-deep in water trying to tag my Chinook when I was out there this year. So it's a real thing. The concern is real, but so is dropping your paper tag or having it blow away in the wind or any of the other things that can happen.
That's true.
Yeah. I guess that phone's just a little more valuable than that paper tag. It would still be a little more, sweat-inducing. dropping your brand new iPhone.
I know. Has it
25.
has it happened as far as you know?
I would have to defer to Tara on that.
Oh, okay.
I haven't heard of it, but I'd be surprised if it hadn't at this point. There is, it is real time. So unless you're just catching them, fish after fish, likely there you've notched what you've got. If it accidentally went into the dip, maybe you had to stop fishing for the day and go get yourself a new cell phone. But again, thankfully, we haven't heard too much about that.
Yeah, and if anybody has, we would also love to hear
Yeah,
your story.
tell us.
Tell us about dropping your phone in the river. You don't have to tell us which river or wherever it was.
Divulge your spot.
Yeah, don't do that. That's not what we're asking for.
That's a question that I've seen in comments is when people submit, does it send a geo spot of where they caught their fish?
Great question.
Okay.
Nope.
No. Okay.
So
That was another one that came up from the enforcement side. It was like, are we going to be able to see where these guys are all catching their fish?
Yeah. Or are other people going to find out where I was catching my fish?
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So we're sticking with the river location codes that have always, or for quite a while, been around for salmon and steelhead. So we'll know as granular as the specific drainage or creek that you're on, but no geolocation.
Okay.
Not down to the latitude, longitude, where you were standing exactly when you pressed complete.
And for folks that are familiar with salmon and steelhead fishing, there aren't a lot of secrets left out there.
Yeah, probably not. That's a good point. Yeah. That's fairly well known.
Chris, can you kind of talk a little bit about how this is also helping our staff as well as it's helping anglers, but specifically how it's helping our staff?
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting bits of data that we can glean from these e-tagging submissions that we otherwise don't get even through our surveys when we're out on the ground interviewing the public. So things like what time of day are fish caught, that gets recorded as part of this app. So not only what day fish are being caught within a week, but specifically what time of day. And that's helpful for us in just our interaction with anglers. If we know that, hey, 60% of the fish in a given day are caught in the morning versus the evening, that's helpful for us as we structure other surveys and work our way out on the landscape with our creel survey staff to collect the other information that we need. So that's a neat one that we can start to dive into. The use of multiple fisheries by individual anglers. Like right now, we don't know because we don't have anglers send their completed permits in at the end of the year. So at least for Chinook, we don't know if anglers are using just the Clearwater Basin or if they move from the Clearwater Basin over to the salmon and up to the upper salmon. So being able to break down that information and see different fishery use from individual anglers is worthwhile to start looking into as well. Another piece that will be helpful for us is looking at the number of individual fish that are harvested by individual anglers. So again, specifically talking about Chinook salmon, we have season limits, and generally that's either a 10-fish season limit for spring, summer Chinook or a 20-fish season limit. We don't really have a good grasp on whether that's an efficient regulation to have as part of our regulations package or not. We don't know if 10% of the anglers are catching that season limit or if 0% of the anglers are doing that. So as we start to learn more, we can start to refine those to something that's more effective on the landscape for accomplishing our management goals and also not unnecessarily perhaps hindering anglers who might otherwise be able to catch another fish or two. So that's some of the stuff that we'll start to look into, and really the sky's the limit on some of the stuff that we can dig into with this.
So we see in real time when people are tagging? I guess you could look at that. There's probably a report out there that would say if all of a sudden there was a bunch of them in the same location, what decisions would be made? I'm thinking of combat fishing when there's tons of people all fishing in one section. Could we? Does that mean anything to us?
Yeah, again, kind of getting back to the current structure of our creel surveys, we generally make harvest estimates at a weekly time interval. And we do have daily data within that week, but it's often not at the resolution that we would want to be able to make finer scale estimates. So this will certainly provide us with that ability. And yeah, I mean, people do catch a lot of fish in a short amount of time. These salmon and steelhead often travel in tight groups, and fishing turns on, and it's really good for short durations. And having this tool to be able to detect that is important. And it's also important to know when there's dead periods, because we have that where, fishing might be great on a Monday and a Tuesday, and then it's dead the rest of the week. Well, depending on what days of the week our current creel survey falls, you may miss those really good days, or that might be the only day you're on the river. And both of those have effects on overestimating or underestimating harvest. So being able to have continuous data monitoring, basically 24/7 through our fisheries in space and time, again, is just going to do great things for our ability to accurately estimate harvest.
So, and you had mentioned previously too, like to have that real-time data potentially on our website. So, an angler that's like kind of on the fence, not real-time data.
Yeah, I don't think we're probably ever going to go to the point where we're putting real-time data summaries on our website. So I think we'll... So
an angler wouldn't be able to make a decision. They have to wait till that Monday or Tuesday that we get the data back out from the field.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So no real-time. No real-time data. It's not like the fish coming up over the ladders where that's...
Yeah, you'll still have hatchery returns to be able to look at the numbers of fish in a given area, but I don't think we have plans to get any finer than what we're currently reporting.
That's good. And we can't stress it enough, though. I mean, the more info we have, the better the fishing will be, and the better the fishery will be for anglers too, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the big risk that we run with all these fisheries is either overestimating harvest, and in that case, we're cheating the anglers out of fish that they, are entitled to catch. That leads to too many fish returning to our hatcheries that our hatchery staff then are burdened with dealing with. Then the flip side of that is underestimating harvest. And when that occurs, then we run the risks of not meeting our hatchery broodstock needs, catching too many wild fish. There's implications on both sides of that coin. So what we're trying to do is, hit the nail on the head with our harvest estimates for as much truth as we can get out of those. And if we can do that effectively, then it helps all of our management processes.
To be able to make strong, well-informed decisions on all of that. That's a great tool. So what does the future of e-tagging look like, Tara, moving potentially into other species?
Yeah, the question of the hour.
Yeah, I think that's at least 3 more people want to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Especially the New Jersey hunters.
Yeah, the New Jersey hunters.
So it's a little bit of a question mark, honestly. I think some of it comes from what we were talking about kind of all the way at the beginning here is kind of why did we do this? I think there's a lot of variation in need between a fisheries need and a wildlife management need, mostly on how that data is currently being used. So, for example, for big game, we're doing very after-action style reporting. So you harvest in the field, and you've got a pretty long amount of time before you're required to come back and give us some data points on harvest. And because we have that separation of tagging essentially and reporting harvest, the way that wildlife has always been approaching how they review that data is pretty different than how fisheries is reviewing their data in a much more real-time, short interval type style. So I think a lot of the questions that we need to answer internally is how do we want to manage our data on the wildlife side of things? Obviously, I'm not the person to answer that question, but I think it's a really fun time to be asking these questions about what do we do with the data we have and how do we better use it. Again, fisheries is a great example of that. We approached e-tagging with a big need to handle data in a more real way, and I think we could probably do that with big game as well. Some of the challenge we're going to see, I think, is just from a volume perspective and complexity perspective. All the rules and things behind a a deer tag are pretty different than behind a salmon permit. And kind of building all of that into the e-tagging process from a system and functionality perspective is going to be a bit more challenging, a bit more of a lift. So we worked for a good 6 months on salmon steelhead e-tagging, and I think we'd need a good year for big game, or if we went with all of our bird species, or if we did controlled hunts, or if we did some odd iteration in between. I think we're going to need just a little more runway than we did with salmon steelhead, which was relatively straightforward.
Tara, do you think, like, when we're talking big game, we're probably talking like deer, elk, but do you think that's too much of a jump? Do you think, could you see it being more realistically like upland birds or even, I guess upland bird hunting?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, from a complexity standpoint, I do think birds in general are actually a great next step, or predatory species that don't have as complicated as a matrix of things that deer, elk, and pronghorn do. But I think, there's a good philosophical question on pull the Band-Aid off or not. Should we just go all in? Is it time to just do it and figure out what we're doing well and what we're not doing well with e-tagging, kind of iterate as we go, as opposed to maybe prolonging this for years and years and years? I think it's a good question to ask ourselves and our public probably on what do you want, and then how can we use that once we've got it out and running? So who knows?
Is it uncharted territory then with other states? When you talk about ripping the Band-Aid off, have other states fully gone in and adopted different, or kind of the full swath of species, or is it kind of like pick and choose still?
I'd say most of them are some variety of pick and choose. Very few are just full-fledged e-tagging for anything and everything. But I will say those that are a lot more in that realm don't have the complexities that we do. And I'm not to, hate on the East at all, it's where I'm from, but when you can have kind of an endless bag limit on white-tailed deer or does, that makes it a lot easier to figure out how to implement a tagging system as opposed to our system where it's very limited. You have spatial limitations, tag number limitations, and a lot of other things to consider when you start building out this mechanism. So I think folks that are a little more knee-deep in this don't necessarily have the same problems or complexities that we do. But I don't know if anyone's just full-blown all in.
Okay.
Sounds like a podcast for another day.
Yeah. Yep. Same with e-tagging alligators. I want to ask Tara after about that.
It's pretty funny.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for sitting down with us and enlightening us as to e-tagging with Idaho Fish and Game. And we just really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.